I'm going to say just a couple words of introduction here, and then Dr. Ayers is going to introduce our speaker, which we're really looking forward to. Before we get started, I wanted to make sure that everybody knows next month in October, Dr. Long is going to be presenting on things that a junior faculty member needs to be successful, another session that we're really looking forward to. And that is going to be, typically these are on the first Friday, but we've had a couple of reasons that we've had to change them for the first couple months here. So that one will also be on the second Friday of October. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Ayers for the introduction.
Thank you, Dr. Arthur. So it's my privilege to introduce Dr. Larson-Prior. She completed her doctoral work in neuroanatomy at the Northeast Ohio University's College of Medicine, postdoctoral work in neurophysiology at Northwestern University, and in computational neuroscience at the University of Chicago. As a faculty member at Carroll University College of Medicine, she became interested in mentorship and took training in the survival skills and ethics course developed at the University of Pittsburgh. She took further training as an intern in the Office of Academic Career Development at the University of Pittsburgh. She's been invited to speak on mentoring relations and mentorship at professional meetings and workshops, and was on the developmental committee for the Responsible Cognitive Research Program at Washington University in St. Louis, where she participated annually in the in-person component of that program. She was a faculty facilitator in a funded 2-year peer mentoring program for junior women faculty at Washington University, has mentored 3 junior faculty, postdoctoral, and graduate trainees through her professional organization annually, and was a panelist on the recent Mentoring Matters workshop. I have had the privilege of working with Dr. Larson-Prior some through Judy Weber's Cobrae, and I will say that I thoroughly enjoy any advice she gives me or my colleagues in becoming, an independent faculty from junior faculty. So without further ado, Linda, we're going to pass the baton to you.
Thank you, Brittany. That was very nice. I appreciate it. So I'm going to say a couple of words too about the way I'd like to see this move forward. I kind of played around with the idea of doing those whiteboard participation things, and I must be PowerPoint disabled because I couldn't figure out how to actually make it work smoothly. So I know that it's really difficult to have participatory meetings when someone is staring at their screen presenting material. I've asked Chrissy to monitor the chat and also your hands. So please, if anything I say brings up a question or a thought or an idea, interrupt me, and we will actually turn the slides off and we will talk where we can see each other. Because I would like this to be, to the best of our ability, participatory. Everybody has questions, and the questions are never the same twice. So I am quite certain that I will not address everybody's questions or concerns. Things come up. People have things they'd really like to get off to talk about with a group of people, and I would like us to talk about it as a group. No one person has all of the answers to anyone's questions. So I just want to make that clear up front. I've got, well, depending on how fast I talk and how many questions I get as we go, I've got maybe an hour's worth of talking. We've got 2 hours worth of time. So I'd like us to use it wisely and to really use this opportunity to talk about any issues, anything that's come up over the course of your own careers that someone else has brought to you and you've kind of gone, I really don't know how to address this or how to deal with this. I'd like to use this as an opportunity to do that, because I can't create a slide deck that will address everybody's concerns or interests. And I think many people come to sessions like this with questions in mind, with specific things they're interested in talking about. So I want to make it clear that this is an open forum, and I will be stopping this so that we can talk to each other. So if you have a question or you want to talk, please go ahead, start your video, and let's talk to each other instead of blank screens, which is always a little more difficult. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out with and I will actually say a very brief history of mentoring. And we're going to focus our history of mentoring very much in the Western world, because that's where we have the most written information. So we can trace the term mentor. We use this term. We can trace this to Homer's Odyssey, in which Mentor was given the job of caring for and guiding Odysseus's son Telemachus when he left to fight the Trojan War. In fact, Mentor was given the job of taking care of and guiding Telemachus, who was going to become a king, and also Odysseus's wife, Penelope. It was his job to establish a paternal relationship with Telemachus, and he would serve as guide, role model, and advisor. But it turned out he wasn't particularly good at that. And so you'll all be glad to know that Athena, the goddess of wisdom, had to step in and actually do the job for him. But of course, being a woman in the time of the Greeks, she had to do it in the guise of a man. So she came and impersonated Mentor when she did. In Homer's tale, it turns out that Mentor was not a particularly memorable character. It was a pretty minor character. So how did this turn out to be the way in which we think of these kinds of relationships? That came from Fenelon, Francois Fenelon, who was actually responsible for a book in which he recreated Mentor as an elderly guide providing sage advice, guidance, and counsel to a younger protege, because Fenelon himself was asked to take care of Louis XIV's young son and to guide him in his development as a prince and future king. And it was with the development of this model of mentoring, this paternalistic model of mentoring, that we begin the journey to what we think of as mentoring today. Okay, of course, that's not going to work. So we know that this
Linda,
model.
can I interrupt you just for 1 second to say that if anybody does have a question, if you'll just put a letter X or anything like that in the chat, just to indicate that you have a question, I will see that and call on you. Raising your hand won't work as well for me because I can only see part of this.
Yeah.
If I'm looking at your slides also, I can't see everybody else that's holding your hand. So if they'll just do any kind of indication that they want some attention, put it in the chat. I'm watching that constantly. That's all. Thank you.
You bet. So we know that this paternalistic model, this senior to junior advisor, has been implemented throughout human history, from the teaching methods that were espoused by Socrates and Plato to the apprenticeships of modern and medieval times, to the way in which we train modern day craftsmen, physicians to a large extent, lawyers and businessmen. So this is a well instantiated model. So all we've done by giving it a name is recognizing that this model exists. These early writings, and at the time of Fenelon and later, there were writings for women, several writings for particular professions, actually on the whole concept of mentoring. And they really universally conceived of mentorship as involving an older, more experienced person who was supporting and engaging in discussion and reflections with a younger, much less experienced mentee. It was expected that that would be linked to not just skill development, but also emotional development, leadership, and social integration. So even early on, there was a broader context provided to the idea of mentorship than the simple conveyance of skill. And these conceptualizations were extended in the 70s and 80s as the field of psychology became interested in development of adults. And so the modern concept of mentoring has been strongly linked to the 1979 publication of two books by Daniel Levison, The Seasons of a Man's Life and The Seasons of a Woman's Life, which were based on a large body of work that he had published on the studies that he did. In fact, it was from Levinson that we came up with the idea of a midlife crisis, because his concepts were a development from pre to late adulthood that went through a series of transitions. And so what he was talking about was the potential ability of an older individual or mentor to help accelerating the development of a younger individual, or one who was a little bit newer in the developmental phases, to accelerate their transition from one stage to the other. And then in 1983, David Clutterbuck introduced the modern concept to the UK. in a book that he wrote, Everyone Needs a Mentor, that turned out to be immensely popular. And you can see from this title, this is the 5th edition, which was published in 2014. You can easily find it on Amazon. And in this book, he proposed that there were differences in the way in which mentorship was carried out in the United States versus the UK, where the US was focused a great deal more on what we will call career sponsorship, where the mentor sponsored the protege into positions of greater and greater leadership authority, versus the UK model, which was more developmental in the sense of an incremental approach and perhaps a little bit more holistic approach. Substantial subsequent research has noted that while it can be career enhancing for mentees, this sponsorship model that was what Clutterbuck was focused as being more common in the US can also be exploitive, exclusive, and divisive. And I think many of you are probably familiar with these more paternalistic models resulting in exactly those possible problems. So the question is, this was all very well and fine, and the idea of these kinds of mentorship relationships have been around probably since mankind began to think about trying to train younger generations, and all the way up to our modern time. And yet you are sitting in a room listening to somebody talk to you about mentorship. So what changed? Why are we suddenly so interested in mentoring? Why do we think you need to listen to somebody talk about something that you've probably known about since you were a little kid because your mom and dad mentored you? Why do we need to do this? And so I want to talk a little bit about what's actually changed, what's changed universally, because our current ideas and thoughts about how we mentor and the fact that mentorship requires some degree of training and some degree of explanation and a broadening of its focus has come about, through the business world and very slowly permeated into the academic world. So I want to talk about it in both contexts. So the figure that I'm showing you here is a timeline of publications in the field of psychology. And I'm going to move you out of my way so that, thank you. It's focused actually on the literature. So this is literally from just after World War I in 1918, when psychology was just getting underway as a field, when we had very few publications, up until the 2010s. This is the cumulative number of articles published that are focused on mentorship and training. So you can see that we have an exponential increase in the number of studies focused specifically on the idea of training and mentorship. And what I want to point out is the change in the models, the change in the way in which people were thinking about it. So of course, in 1918, when psychology was new, all of these articles were focused on developing curricula and training programs. How are we going to teach people to be members of this field? By the 1940s, interest had begun to focus on the factors that predicted success for individuals who were in these training programs. And in the 50s, the focus shifted yet again to the development of the skills necessary for the people training those trainees to make those trainees successful in those careers. And you can see that the publications continue to expand until we hit I can't even read this very well, so I can't expect you to either, until we hit the 1980s, when there was a new shift in the way in which people were thinking about mentoring. And here it was, what training factors are actually impacting the transfer of knowledge or skill from whoever is providing this mentorship to the mentee, and to an emphasis on more theory-driven ideas of how mentorship should be handled and what it meant and how we should think about training the next generation. And so it was that until the 1980s, we had still focused very much on this dyadic senior to junior relationship. And in the 80s, there became an interest and a far greater focus on the individual. And in the individual we're talking about here is the mentee. So taking the emphasis away from who's providing the training and what the training is, and asking, well, what factors impact the ability of a given individual to accept and utilize the information that's being provided or the skill set that they're being given in order to promote their own success. And in the 1990s, this grew into the idea of context. Under what circumstances, in what, to what degree does the mentee's perception of their mentor's relationship to them, of the work environment, impact their success? And by the 2000s, the focus became not only on individuals, but also the idea that we could grow and develop in teams rather than solely as individuals. So there's been this gradual shift from the traditional dyadic senior to junior relationship in mentoring that was very, very focused on the actual skill that was to be transferred, to a far more nuanced view and more expanded view that now asks, what do we have to develop in the mentee other than a simple transference of skill? And not that sometimes skill alone is not what we're looking for, but that a mentor-mentee relationship should be a little bit more. This exponential growth in the number of publications addressing this question has been part and parcel of the growth in the increase in information and skills actually needed to succeed in business, in the academy, in our current workplace. And so the emphasis has moved to an interest in the mechanisms by which our trainees can gain all of this information faster and be more efficient in its application in their own careers. Once there was the luxury in the academy of spending 10 to 50 years developing your research and writing your final thesis. And now it will be done in 4 or 5 years or else. So in the academy, we can see this shift from the 30s to the 2020s, and we can see the compression in time over which trainees need to gain not just the kind of expertise they needed in the 30s, but triple, quadruple, 10 times as much information has to be transferred in order for them to be successful in their career. Now, we're all members of the academy, so we'll look specifically here at what's changed in the academy. After World War II, research was now funded predominantly through the federal government, and federal dollars have since then played critical role in academic research, and the impact of that is growing exponentially. So here we're looking at the NIH trends in research funding, and of course, the green line, which you're seeing this huge growth in, that's biomedical research. That's what we do. So the growth in federal dollars has been huge, and it has been matched by the growth in individuals seeking those funds. There's been a shift in the way in which academic centers perceive their role, a shift from a service-based function to a for-profit based function, even though they're all nonprofits. So we see much more of a revenue generating model currently in the academy, regardless of whether you're in an academic medical center or you're in a research university, the same thing obtains. And as a result, the metrics for success are increasingly focused on publications and grant funding. And so you're looking here on the bottom left at a model that's just looking at a set of different publication metrics and the growth in the number of publications from the 1970s to the 2020s. And you can see that once again, we're looking at exponential growth. So let's think for a moment about why mentorship and mentoring has become such a central focus in the academy now. So our reality, the reality in which we all currently live, involves unique challenges at every stage of our careers. So we start with the graduate and medical school career, in which you're gaining your initial grounding in your field. For the graduate career, you're gaining bench science skills, you're gaining your credentials, you're creating your publication record, and you're beginning to grow an academic network, a professional network. For the basic scientists, what are you expected to do? Well, you're expected to get B's or A's in all of your coursework, expected to gain experimental skills. You're expected to sit down and think about what your thesis is going to be and write it down because you're going to be writing a grant about it. You're going to have to advance to candidacy. And after that, you're going to have to do your dissertation research, write your dissertation, and defend it. If you're a medical student, you're going to be expected to do passing level work in the basic sciences, and that had better be good enough that when you take your USMLE Step 1, you pass, hopefully with a great score. You're going to be introduced to clinical skills and be expected to gain expertise. You're going to start taking your clinical rotations where you will be judged on your performance, your interactions with your patients, and your professional skill. And then, of course, you're going to be taking USMLE Step 2 CK and moving on to your residency. In your postdoctoral years or your fellowship years, you're going to continue to develop your skills in the basic sciences. And if you go into the clinical research field, you're going to define and establish your own research program independent now of your graduate and your postdoctoral labs. You're going to gain skill as a grant writer and hopefully bring in your first grant. You're going to continue to write papers. You're going to now go to conferences, give posters, give talks, and continue to grow your professional network. So once again, we have a few differences between the basic sciences and the medical sciences. And of course, we have people who bridge the gap here between them. So new experimental or clinical skills for the basic scientists, papers, papers, papers. Your postdoctoral fellowship years are the time when you have the freedom to do nothing but research. And this is the last chance you got. Grant proposals, Fs and Ks, mentored awards, increased professional networking. So you're going to conferences, you're presenting your work, you're talking to people. You're relying a little bit less now on your postdoctoral advisor and a little bit more on who you meet and who you choose to interact with to grow this network. And of course, you're improving your skill as a speaker and a communicator of scientific knowledge. Of course, for fellowships and residencies for the medical sciences, the skill development, networking are also requirement. You're going to start working in your specialty area, gaining specialty training. You've got USMLE Step 3 to pass. You probably participate in some clinical trials, and you're going to be looking at medical ethics in daily practice, and potentially there will also be a formal program. Okay, so here's our first two levels. These are our substantial training levels. These are levels where frequently the person that you think of as your mentor is the thesis advisor, postdoctoral advisor, clinical attendings. They shouldn't be the only ones, but those are probably your primary people that you've been interacting with. And now you're going to get your first faculty position, and everything is going to change, because as soon as you walk in the door, you are no longer a research scientist. You are no longer predominantly a clinician in most cases. You are now a small business owner. Your job is to run your enterprise so that you bring in money. You don't get it, the institution gets it, but you bring in money, you manage your own personnel, you train students, you continue to gain more skills, but now you have to do that work-life balance thing. You have to manage your time and other people's time. You have to help your students advance. You have to learn the politics of your institution, the politics of your department, and nobody told you how to do that. And you got to learn it fast. What have you got? 5 or 6 years before you go up for promotion and tenure? Oh yeah, and you got to learn about promotion and tenure too. So all of a sudden, you've just walked into a maelstrom of, I have no idea how to do this job. Or maybe I have limited idea how to do this job. And this is an area where a lot of people falter. This is a transition where mentorship is critical, and it is not as obviously available to you as it was in your training years. In your training years, you had kind of a formal relationship that set this mentorship relationship up for you. And it may not have worked very well, or it may have been brilliant, or it may have been somewhere in between, but it was pretty codified. You had an idea that this person could be a mentor. It would have been good if at that point in time you had somebody who pointed out to you that mentoring networks are really critical and you needed more than one mentor, but whether that happened or it didn't, there was someone you could talk to. In your faculty position, it's all on you. Here's a time when this is a transition in your career, and it's a transition that requires help, and it's not always clear where it's going to come from. This is one of the reasons why formal mentoring programs are increasingly being developed in the academy. But informal mechanisms are also available and they should be utilized. The question is, who knows what they are and how to find them? And that's why you're sitting listening to me chat to you in a group of people, because these transitions are really hard and it's not always clear how to find the people that you need to help you through them or to answer your questions. So the next question is, I've told you why things changed. I told you why you're sitting here listening to me and why TRI and the CCOP and numerous other organizations put forward formal and informal mentoring and try to point out where it is, how it can be used, and what you can use it for. But it is amazing to me how few people take advantage of that. So let us walk through just briefly whether or not mentoring actually impacts success. And now you saw all those papers that we looked at in the field of psychology. I could show you the same exponential growth in the mentorship literature in the academic sciences, in STEM, in medical school, in specific specialty rotations in medicine. And every one of them will tell you that mentoring does positively impact career success. So in this first paper that I'm showing you by McCrae and Zimmerman, this was a systematic review of 34 mentoring programs in the health sciences. It included pharmacy, medicine, and nursing. And the goal of the paper was to identify specific aspects of mentoring that were associated with success. And the outcome here was that the three areas in which they looked were self-efficacy, how well the mentee actually felt like they had gained confidence in their own capabilities, scholarly activity, how many grants had been put in, how many publications had been accepted, promotion with or without tenure, and then retention at their individual institutions. And all of them showed improvement for the vast majority of participants in those studies. So the interesting thing to me is that we have a ton of evidence that mentoring matters. And even yet, formal mentoring programs exist in very few academic health sciences institutions. One of the conclusions from this paper is that individual mentoring is great, but programs like this, where formal curricula in mentorship, training mentors, training mentees, just talking about the whole process, actually also improve the success rate for mentees and trainees. So having hopefully convinced you that mentoring is actually beneficial, let's talk about what it is. So the first thing that we have to recognize about mentoring, and the thing that frequently trips us up in a mentoring relationship, is to recognize that it is a bidirectional, yes, bidirectional, dynamic social interaction. So no matter how it's formulated, and we will talk about different ways it can be formulated, it is social. And all social interactions require that the two individuals who are, or more, who are taking part in it, get along with each other. If you can't get along with the people who are trying to help you, or you can't get along with the person you think you want to help, it's not going to be a good relationship. It won't work. It's dynamic because it's constantly reentrant, and we're going to talk about this. It's and on many levels, but let's just talk about a simple social level. Over the course of 5 years, people change. They change their views on what they're doing. They have now experienced things that they hadn't experienced before that change their view of the way in which they want to carry their career forward. They decide they don't want to do what it is they thought they wanted to do when they walked into this relationship, or they leave. So this is very dynamic. It's not something that's static. It's not, I'm going to find a mentor and then we're going to stay together for 5 years and it's all going to be perfect, because that seldom works out. It does work out. And when it does, it's great, but it doesn't always. And so you shouldn't go into these relationships thinking that they're static, that they're always going to be what they are right now, because that just won't work.
Hey, Linda,
Yes, ma'am.
I had a question in the chat. Will the applicant or the people on this Zoom be able to have access to the slides that you're presenting? Can they get a copy of the slides?
Sure. I don't know how you want to handle that, but I mean, I'm happy. So let me just start with, they're too big to email.
Okay,
They're
we
just
can
too big
discuss
to
that at the
email.
end of the meeting. That's
Yeah.
the only question that's came up yet, but we'll reach back out on that.
For sure.
Thank you.
Okay, the mentoring relationship often includes instruction or guidance from a single individual that's needed for the completion of some specific goal. So I'll just throw one out there. You need to get a P&T packet together, and you have a mentoring team, and that mentoring team is there to help you put that P&T packet together. Very specific goal, time limited. Everybody knows what they're trying to accomplish. But on a broader level, and if we want to think of this as the more comprehensive view of what mentoring is, it is distinct from advice in that it is an engagement where that advice is offered based on the needs and goals that are specific to the actual mentee. And that will not always be the same. So now let's go back to our P&T example. I could just walk you through, here's what a P&T packet is supposed to hold. And in fact, if you go to the P&T meetings every year, there will be a member of the institutional committee who says, here's what your packet should contain, and here's the order in which it should be completed, and here's the way it should look. And it's generic. Everybody in that track has the same information. But if I talk to one of my faculty members about what has to go into their P&T packet, it's going to be based on their own experiences and their own background. You should emphasize this because this is something you did brilliantly. You should perhaps do this because as you've done it, it doesn't fully let the review committee know what you've accomplished. And then I'm working with the individual and not with a generic set of data or skills, even though the generic set of skills is still necessary. So we're making a distinction now between advice, which can be very, very specific and somewhat general, and mentorship, which is quite specific to the experiences and needs of the individual who's being mentored in that circumstance. Okay, so we've established the need for mentors. So let's talk about what might you get from having a mentor. And I'm going to try to make this both ways. So there's a common perception among mentors that all the benefits go to the mentees, that all they get is more time burden. And I would like to try to point out that that's just not true. This is a bi-directional relationship. The mentees benefit, but so do the mentors. And in my opinion, one of the greatest benefits to me as a mentor is that I gain a breadth in understanding. I get to look at the world through somebody else's eyes. I get to hear about experiences that I may never have experienced and may indeed never experience from the point of view of someone who has had experience. There's always benefit to the mentor. And if nothing else, you gain one more individual in your professional network because your mentees become part of your network and they will grow, have mentees of their own, and become mentors on their own. So this really is beneficial to both mentor and mentee. For the mentee, of course, a primary driver of benefit is professional skill development. So there's experiential training under the guiding eye of the mentor or advisor. There's, of course, the development of communication skills, written and oral. There's access to resources and information that you would not have known about otherwise. There are, and let me say that one of the things that throws back advantage to the mentor that a lot of people in the bench sciences are well aware of, in this experiential training, the mentor gets to say to the student, I want you to go off and learn how to do this technique. I'm going to send you to this guy's lab. That's great for the mentee. They get to go to another lab. They get to talk to other students. They get to add another senior individual to their mentoring and professional network. And they bring back a skill set to the lab that the mentor doesn't know how to do. So now we've added another skill set to that laboratory that all other students can benefit from, that the mentor can benefit from, but the mentor didn't need to go off and get that training. That came from somebody else. Win-win situation for both people. Turns out to be a big one. One of the benefits to a mentee is self-efficacy, an increase in self-confidence of their own skill set. So they have a role model. This is kind of the way things are done. That's what one of the things their mentor can give them. They have somebody to go to for advice. And this can be very broad or it can be very narrow, but they know that this person can provide advice in this context under these circumstances. And they have someone to talk about in terms of how they plan their career. And we're going to talk a lot about planning your career, because if you've got a short timeline and you need to get things done rapidly and become very successful, to become successful, then you need a plan. So self-efficacy and self-confidence. I want to point out that this relationship has to be one, if it's bidirectional and it's and particularly if it's dyadic, but realistically, no matter what, there has to be trust. So both mentor and mentee have to trust each other. They have to trust that they're not going to go telling everybody in the entire institution everything they talk about. They have to trust that the person that they're working with has their best interests in mind as well as their own interests. They have to trust that they're being honest with one another. Your mentor is there to provide not just advice, but to give you the kinds of things, to sit there and say, great job, you did a great job, or wow, this is really fantastic. And to provide the feedback that says, you could have done better than this. And of course, they're there to be a career sponsor. So they're the ones who are going to write that letter for your postdoctoral position. They're going to write letters for you for quite some time to come. There'll be people that you can go to and say, hey, I need a collaborator for this on my grant. That's part of building your network. And finally, and this one I think is somewhat undervalued and seldom discussed, an evaluation of the environment. So here you are in a new place and you need a guide. What are the rules? What are the rules in your professional community? What are the rules in the institution you just landed in? Both the ones that were written down and the ones that aren't. And then of course they can provide access to their own network. And that's going to help you grow yours. And here's another place where this mutual benefit comes in. So you as a mentee are growing your network. Your mentor has a network that hopefully is dynamic as well. And now you get to kind of merge the two and everybody gets a bigger network. Always good. There are 4 primary organizational models for mentoring. One we've just spent a lot of time discussing is this one, the traditional model of a dyad, one-on-one. It's a very personal relationship. Of course, it's based on mutual trust and communication. It can be a relationship that can feel exploitive, but when it works, it's extremely beneficial and it can be very long-lasting. Even as the mentee outgrows specific needs, the relationship can continue to exist. One to many. So we have one facilitator or mentor to many mentees. This never works with like 20, but I did a facilitated peer mentoring group and I had 7 or 8 in my group and it was very successful. It could be 2 or 3. It's generally a formalized mentoring program. And a primary issue here is the facilitator expertise. So the facilitator has some area of expertise or some experiential expertise that the mentors want to tap into. And that's when this works the best. Then we have a many-to-one approach or a team approach. This is very often a formal mentoring type of program. So think of a thesis committee or a doctoral committee. Think of a faculty mentoring committee. A couple of departments on campus actually formalize mentorship in that manner. I have seen it done in formal programs in nursing, for example. So this is a way of making faculty time very codified, and providing mentees with multiple mentors without having that mentee have to make multiple appointments every week to talk to them. The focus is generally on the achievement of some goal. And in this case, there's usually some kind of shared interest or need. And finally, we have many-to-many or peer mentoring is generally the model I would use here, although peer can be a very broad concept. So it's generally individuals at similar levels in their training with shared goals, but they can have very diverse backgrounds, very different experiences, very different knowledge. They can be in different fields, and there's no necessity for them to be at the same career level. They can be at multiple career levels, but in general, for a peer mentoring program, it would be at similar career levels. There are also different types of goals and purposes for a mentoring relationship. The one where probably the dyadic, most common traditional one is supervisory mentoring. So here your advisor or your supervisor is your mentor. It's usually a senior individual working with a junior individual. I'm going to start right out. If it's not going to end up in a disaster, it requires a very clear delineation of the expectations of both mentor and mentee for the relationship. It is, of course, generally dyadic, one-on-one, but it could involve a team. So we talked about thesis committees, for example, very specific, senior to junior, definitely advisory, and working to a very specific goal. Then we have what we call situational mentoring. So here, this is the kind of mentoring where I need to learn to do confocal microscopy. I need to find somebody who is an expert in confocal microscopy, go to that person's lab and learn how to do it. That would be a situational mentoring relationship. It's usually expert to less skilled or inexpert. This does not have to be senior to junior. It's just expert to less expert. It's usually episodic or short term. So you may go several times, or you may just go for one period of time and then you're done. And it may occur in any of the organizational formats that we just discussed. And then, for lack of a better term, we have what we call natural mentoring. And how do we differentiate this? This is informal. And by that, I mean, there's been no formal program exists to create this. This is one where the mentee or the mentor simply says, I can offer you help here, or I would like your assistance here. Would you mentor me? It could, like I said, could be initiated by either the mentor or the mentee. It could be a mentorship where mentee comes in and says, I really appreciate your mentoring me on my career as I move from my postdoctoral career to a faculty position, or from my assistant professorship to my associate, or from associate to full. I could use your help in determining whether or not I'm ready to make that transition. So in that case, it's what we call comprehensive. I'm asking you to look at all aspects of my career, or it could be very specific. In other words, I would really appreciate your mentorship in helping me do a better job of creating a lecture for a class. In most cases, this is a dyadic relationship, one-on-one. No questions? Okay, well, we'll get to questions. All right. If you want to get the most out of a mentoring relationship, you have to know what it is you want and what it is you need. So you have to have a plan. What you're looking here on the right, this figure, came from this Montgomery paper that I'm giving you here, and they call it a roadmap. There are several of these, but this one is pretty straightforward, makes life pretty simple. And it starts with the first step. develop a plan. Sit down and ask yourself, what do I need to get to my goals? What are my goals? In order to get there, how do I get what I need? And that is what you're doing when you do your planning. So you got to develop a plan. It means you have to sit down and you really have to ask yourself, what is it I want to do? And I've had students say, well, I don't really know. Like, I mean, I want to get my doctoral degree. Yeah. Okay, that's really great. So what are you going to do first? You got to do more than just say that, because there's no plan there. How are you going to get to your goal? You have to think about what your goals are. You have to ask, what are the steps along the way? And then you have to ask, how do I accomplish those steps? You have to ask yourself, what do you already know? And what do you need to know? You have to look at your choices. When you're starting your career as a graduate student, the easiest choice is, I'm going to be just like my thesis advisor, or I'm going to be just like the faculty mentor that was given to me by the academic houses. I'm going to be just like that person. But that's not your only choice. You don't have to be that. There are other choices, and you should know what those are. Unless you've known from the get-go that you're right on the path you want to go, in which case that's fine. That's the choice you've already made. You have to look at the priorities that you're planning to, what are your priorities? And here's the work-life balance thing, guys. It's not just, I'm going to get this done. If you think about what it takes to do that, if you think about, I'm in my first year of medical school. Here's my time commitment. Here's how much time I have to put into studying. Here's the amount of time I have to be in class. Here's the times that I'm committed to doing whatever clinical training is currently available to me. I'm committed to that. What time does that leave me left to spend time with my family, to be involved in athletics, to do community service? And how am I going to rank my priorities? How am I going to set this stuff up? And then you're going to have to figure out, how do I move through this? How do I move through the plan that I just create? And then I have here, prepare for change, because you're going to do it and then you're going to redo it. And every time you redo it, it's because something changed. So when we sit down and we talk about priorities, you have your professional priorities, but you also have family responsibilities. You have personal goals and aspirations that are outside of your profession. So you have to be really careful that you haven't just committed 220% of your time, because you are going to be a very unhappy person and not terribly successful if you do that. You have to learn to manage your time, and some of us are not very good at that, but time management's a critical component here. And you have to figure out how to organize your life around all of that planning. And I know I'm going to get pushback here, guys. I expect some questions here. My suggestion is that every one of you, and I don't care if you're a full professor, sit down and write an individual development plan, because that's exactly what it's doing. It's asking you, what do I know? What can I do? What am I good at? I'm going to assess, where are the gaps? What do I need to gain? What do I need to add to my path that I currently don't have? Where am I strongest? Where am I weakest? And then, do I know what I don't know? Is there some way I need to go out and ask whether or not there's something I've missed? That's the examination, the self-reflection of your professional skills. And then you got to ask yourself, what interests you? That's gonna change over the course of your life. What makes you motivated? If you get up every morning and you don't want to go to work, or you walk into the lab and the last thing you want to do is sit down at that bench, you're not going to be very successful. So don't choose to do that if it bores you, or if it doesn't interest you, or if it frustrates you. Figure out what makes you tick. What in your field was the reason you did this? Why are you here? Is there any, if you're starting to burn out, if things aren't working, are there other people who you can work with? Can you change direction? Would that help? Can you pull back? Should you regroup? Do you need to think about adding more people to the group you already have? What interests you? And then what are your personal values? What makes you feel rewarded? What kind of reminds me of something I heard about. Oh, I won't even go there. What makes you feel rewarded? Some of us just glow under praise. All anybody has to say was, I think you're really great at this, and it makes us feel all warm and fuzzy, and we're motivated to work harder. For some of us, that's nice, but it's not really motivating. What's motivating is to go out and say, I have this problem I need to solve. I'm really motivated when I'm deep in the bowels of trying to figure a problem out. Some of us sit down and the last thing in the world we want to do at 5 o'clock at night is read another scientific paper. Some of us, first thing we want to do in the morning and last thing we want to do at night is read another scientific paper. So you got to figure out what works for you, where your values are, what responsibilities that aren't professional have to be part of your consideration of your career goals. If you've got small children, you have to consider that in your career goals. That has to be part of what your assessment of your individual development plan is going to be. And you're going to put all those things together to address this question of what do I need? What are my goals? Who can help me get there? Or what resources do I need? And how can I find them? Because that's what that plan is supposed to do for you. And then I want to point you to this cartoon that I found about paths to success. And I want to point out two things. The first one is, I know very few people who actually walked the linear path of an academic career where they literally, no breaks, graduate school, postdoc, faculty position, tenure, blah. I really know very few people who did that. But what I like here is the way in which the linear path is depicted, because it sounds so easy, but it's not. Even if you manage to do that nice linear path and you got your first RO1 at 35, which is the average, it wasn't easy. And you made sacrifices. And not all of us are able to make those kinds of sacrifices. So our path may be a little different. It could be this mythical walk through a maze. It could go all over the place, up, down, and in between. It could, basically land us someplace we don't want to be. Most of us take a somewhat torturous path. And every step in one of these more tortuous paths offers us choices. And at every choice point, every transition point, you need to reevaluate where you're going and what you want. Because your career will not be successful if it is not satisfying, if it isn't something you want to get up every morning to do. So, okay, you say, all right, fine, I can write an IDP. I have no idea how to start. I know, most people don't. And I've worked with a lot of students and they write their IDP, and we have to talk about what IDPs are and how it would be better if they broke it down a little bit more. But there are resources out there to help. So science does have I even gave you the link here, my idp.sciencecareers.org. This is a template. You can fill it out. I don't particularly like it because it's all online, but if you're an all online kind of guy, this is a great way to go. It also offers advice. It was designed for postdocs originally, but it can be used by anybody. So there's like a postdoctoral forum where people can talk about things that went right and wrong in their life. There are templates. All you have to do is look for an IDP on Google and you will get 5,000 hits. You can pick any kind of template that you like. Almost every university publishes them. On the right here is one that I helped to develop, so I kind of like it. Pick it. What are you doing? What are my skills, abilities, and knowledge? Where are my gaps? What am I interested in? Where are my goals? And how does it fit with my roles, responsibilities, and values? That's what goes into this. And in the end, it's then, how am I going to get where I want to go? And break this break this into achievable goals, guys, because when you get over here to this, did I complete it? I can tell you whether or not I completed a 1-semester course. It'll take me a while to tell you whether or not I got my PhD. So it's got to be things that you can literally say, this is a goal that I can achieve in a finite period of time. Then it's useful to you. It's not useful to you if you have to wait 5 years before you'll ever know whether or not you completed it, because all the steps to get to that goal you missed. And I will point out that according to a 2005 survey of postdoctoral researchers, this of course was a survey, as I said, those who wrote an IDP averaged 30% more first authored publications and 25% more grant applications than those who did not. It just plain helps to put your goals down and figure out how you plan to get to them. And I will bet Amy Franks can talk to this very topic in terms of writing papers. And maybe I'll make her do that. Going forward.
Good to be, Linda.
Okay, so having developed a plan, now you have to go out and find some mentors. And as I said, you can readily identify a few people as potential mentors, or you can look for mentors who have worked with you in the past. You can find some current mentors if they are assigned as a part of a formal program. So for example, many institutions assign faculty mentors to incoming junior faculty. And of course, thesis advisors exist for postdoctoral fellows, and attendings exist for residents, for the residents. So there are some people floating around that you can probably pretty readily identify as a mentor. You can sit down and talk to them. Guess what? It will really help your relationship with your mentor if you start by saying, I have this IDP, here's my goals. You know what you want to do. And all you're asking this person to do is help you get there, help you achieve the goals, and then help you reassess every 6 months or year or whatever, help you reassess and ask, now what do I need? Where should I go? Help you think about whether or not the decision you made as you sit there in crisis, maybe I made the wrong choice. Have somebody there to talk to about that. So the IDP that you create and you continue to work with provides a great touchstone for the discussions you'll have with mentors about what you need to get to your goal. And then beginning from these known mentors, you can use their network to define mentors that you didn't know about when you started. There are other ways to develop a mentoring relationship and to define mentors. You could identify someone with an expertise in an area you want to learn more about, or who's in a position, a senior person in your department, or a senior person in a organization that you belong to, whose guidance that you think would be useful to you, or who you would like to get some advice from. Or you can look for people in your professional organization. You can look for a successful professional outside of your profession. And there are an increasing number of online mentoring programs that you could also go to. I know NRM Net, which is a program that basically keeps a cadre of mentors. And I believe there's a new program coming out from TRI that plans to do the same thing, where you have a cadre of people who've identified as mentors, and they have a list of the things they do and where they are and what their position is. And people who want to come in as mentors can match themselves up based on that with someone as a mentor. The mentors that you choose can be situational, right, for a specific purpose. They can be supervisory, or they can be natural. You can just ask them for some specific information, or maybe more comprehensive information from what you know of them. They can be peers, they can be senior to you, they can be specific to a skill that you want to learn, or they can provide an experience that you want to have, or they can just be there to kind of talk to you comprehensively about your career and how you want to develop your career. But the goal ultimately is to build a network of mentors from whom you are going to form the basis of your professional organization. And then as that organization grows, you will be a mentor and you will have mentees who do the same thing using you, and your network will grow and grow and grow. In fact, there's kind of a fun thing that the research community has decided to delve into, in which they do social network analysis.
You're a late starter. I started at 7, so I'm an hour up on.
Oh, sorry, he's on another call. Sorry, I'm stuck on he started at 7. So the idea is that you ask where you are, who your mentors were, who their mentors were, and you build this little genetic tree. Kind of fun. A lot of people like it. Okay, so you've identified a mentor or 6 or 7. And now what you have to do is to develop the relationship with that mentor. So now we get back to this roadmap and we find the remaining parts after self-reflection. We have to establish the mentoring relationship. And what does that mean? That really just means, what are the ground rules for the way in which we're going to interact with one another? How often do we want to meet? How do we want to meet? Do we want to meet at a coffee shop? Do we want to meet at work? Do we want to meet online? Do we want to do all 3? How do we want to meet? How frequently do we want to meet? How formal do we want to be? Do we want to sit together and chit chat? Or do we want to go over my IDP? Or what do we want to do? And then whether you do this over the course of your relationship or you try to set the stage early, figure out how you and your mentor want to receive information. So some people really like to talk to each other with a clear goal for every interaction. So we're here right now to talk about your IDP. We're here right now to talk about the first grant that you're going to write. We're here right now to talk about a problem you have with your departmental chair. If you are not comfortable with that kind of approach, your mentoring relationship is going to be problematic. Either one of you is going to have to change, or it's probably going to have to be something much more restrictive in the way in which you utilize it. So this is something that a lot of people don't think about, that people don't necessarily like the same way of establishing a relationship or talking to one another. And if you can't be comfortable with each other, the relationship's not going to be very successful. Then upfront, what expectations? What are the expectations of the mentor and what are the expectations of the mentee? What is it that the mentee wants from this relationship? What are they looking for? Those expectations have to be clear. If you start a relationship and it's just kind of like, oh, I'm here to ask about career development, it's going to go where it goes. And it may not go where you want it to go. So it's always a good idea to get those expectations up there up front. And those expectations can be also concern your format. How do you like to get information about cancellations? Something came up, I can't make it. Does it have to be, it won't always be, 24 hours in advance. But if I have to cancel because my baby's sick, or I had to go pick someone up at the airport, and I didn't know that, how do you want to know? How does your mentor want to know that? If your mentor has to cancel, how do you want to know it? What's the best way are you willing to share phone numbers, or is it uncomfortable for one person to do that? You need to get those expectations out. And then of course, what's the purpose of the relationship? Is it career development? Is it P&T? Is it work-life balance? Is it all of those things? What is it you want to get out of the relationship? And I see a lot of stuff going on. And here, okay. Okay, so when you sit down with these expectations, when you have in your own mind what it is I want to get out of this, be realistic. In order to set these expectations, you have to communicate. You and your mentor have to communicate one to the other. But I have seen some real doozies of expectations. So your mentors cannot make you successful. They can help you be successful, but they cannot ensure your success. That's up to you. Your mentor is there to provide suggestions, to guide you, to support you, to encourage you, to give you resources. That's what your mentor is there for. If you choose not to take advantage of those, that's on you, not them. If they never give them to you, that's on them. But if you get it and you don't take advantage of it, that's on you. Your success is in your hands. And even more than that, don't let someone else define success for you. So just because your mentor thinks that 5 papers a year is the absolute requirement for a successful career, if in your mind you think 2 papers in top-notch journals will do, that's your career. You get to define your success. If your mentor thinks that choosing to move from an academic medical center like UAMS to teach in a small liberal arts college means you failed, that's on him. That's his problem, not yours. You got to define whether that was success. If that's what you wanted and that was your goal, that was where you wanted to be, then you're successful. Be sure you have in your own mind what success means to you, and it will probably change over the course of your career. And then don't think that your mentors know what it is you want or need. They don't. They cannot read your mind. You have to tell them. That's what that IDP is there for. And then, as I said, communication is key, and these expectations have to be discussed with your mentor. So we're going to go on and we're going to talk about a little more specifics. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Anything they'd like to discuss? Any ideas? Any things they'd like to add? Stuff they think is different from what I've just said, their own experiences?
I have a question. So just back to the idea of the more informal mentorship relationships. Sometimes there can be a sort of a dual relationship where, you know, this is someone that you want to have a mentorship relationship with, but they also have some, you know, some other more formal relationship within the organizational structure, or maybe they're friends, or maybe there's, you know, you have a personal relationship, et cetera. I'm wondering if you can say anything about the expectations in regards to like confidentiality and boundaries and, you know, that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah. So we talked a little bit about trust. And one of the things that a successful mentoring relationship has to have is the trust that what you say to each other is between you. It's confidential. Now, especially if it's a friend, if it's a personal friends, well, let's face it, they gossip. So, and it's just part of the human contract. So if it's a personal friend and you are now talking about something that you want to have maintained confidentiality on, then you should say so. This is just between you and me. And if you can't trust the person you're talking to keep it just between you and me, then that relationship is not a particularly successful mentoring relationship. If you are in a relationship and you don't know whether you can trust that person, I think that's something you'd have to discuss. It should be explicitly stated. I expect that when we talk to each other about my career, that it's confidential. Are you good with that?
Yeah, so I think that all makes sense. I think you know, especially in the UAMS environment where it's a very shallow pool of a lot of people that know each other. I think that I very much like the idea of having explicit conversations about, you know, this specific thing we're talking about is, you know, is confidential. But I think in a sort of a broader sense, sometimes it feels like everyone kind of is in everyone else's business, and you know, and just. Yeah, I'm just wondering what the expectations are on a more global level in terms of if someone is your mentor, someone is your mentee, like, is the expectation that you're going to be actively advocating for them, or is the expectation more that the fact that your whole relationship is considered confidential?
So I think this is a really important question. And I think it comes down to the idea here is that just because this is a mentorship relationship and I'm just going to come at it from the point of the mentee, just because this person is your mentor does not really ensure that they are willing to give you all of the things that you would like to have out of that relationship. So there has to be, part of this communication has to be, what is the mentor willing to provide? So is the mentor willing to be an advocate, a sponsor for you? Not all mentors are willing to do that. Even if they're willing to stand in the background and cheer you on, they're not necessarily willing to stand up and say, I'd like this person to be part of this, or I nominate this person to do that. And then you have to decide as the mentee whether or not what they're willing to give is something you're happy to take. Is that enough for you? If you want something else, then find another mentor to go with that. You could legitimately say this relationship isn't working for me, and that might be exactly correct. Or you could say, okay, this relationship is not giving me everything I want. To get the other thing I want, I have to find another relationship. But I think what you're talking about here really is part and parcel of what the mentor is willing to provide. On the other side of the coin, on the I'm a mentor and I expect, something similar occurs, but it's an amazing, it is a little lopsided in this particular relationship, because for the mentee, think of it as I've come in and I've asked for advice, and the expectation is that they will, if they don't take it, they'll at least discuss with you why not, but otherwise they're going to take it, and that they will be proactive, that if they've come to ask and you provide, let's take, for example, writing your first paper. So you say to the mentee, first authorship goes to the person who provides the initial draft. You kind of expect that mentee to come back with an initial draft. And if they don't, you're not going to be very happy with them, and you're probably going to tell them so. So the expectation is that the mentee is going to be proactive, whereas I'm telling you that the mentee has to be aware that the mentor might not be. And that's just kind of part and parcel of the imbalance of the situation, because it is really a situation in which there is not absolute balance between mentor and mentee. It is one person asking for advice and assistance from another. And so here you have to balance what they're willing to give you with what it is you want. Does that talk to some of the things you're asking about, Carolyn?
Yes, very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on to a kind of global discussion of what the roles and responsibilities of each member of this dyad or team is. So the expectation is that the mentor is there to facilitate the mentee's career growth. They're there to provide what's needed to help that individual develop their career. Maybe for only a small portion of that career, maybe for only a specific aspect of that career, but whatever it is, it's about growing their career. And it is to take advisement to understand the mentee's goals and desires and skills. So the mentor will provide skills if requested or needed, guidance and feedback. They are there to listen. And this one's important. Active listening on the part of a mentor is important. A mentor who's busily answering his email when they're theoretically talking to a mentee is not doing their job. They're there to evaluate the mentee's plans, papers, grants, whatever it is they're working on, to maintain confidentiality and to maintain regular contact. And those two things are true for both mentor and mentee. So this regular contact, that's part of that format. How are you setting up your mentoring career? Are you meeting monthly? Are you meeting weekly? Are you meeting bi-weekly? How are you getting together? And when you're together as mentor and mentee, everything you say is confidential. That's the expectation. If you need to write it down to believe it of each other, then write it down. Mentoring contracts are out there. Okay, the mentee, what do they have to do? They have to be open to the skills and knowledge that is being provided. They asked for it. They solicited it. They don't get to just ignore it. They have to have a plan. They need to identify their needs, set goals, and seek advice. They need to accept feedback. And everybody on this call knows that that is not necessarily easy. The first time you got back a research paper that you sweat blood over, and it is one solid line of red because your advisor thinks you did not do such a good job, that hurts. That first grant that was triaged, man, that hurts. So feedback's not easy. Throughout an entire career, we're going to have to learn to deal with it. Part of your job as a mentee is to accept that feedback and to accept responsibility for the actions you've taken, to maintain confidentiality and to maintain regular contact. And I have to say that the mentor may choose, you may in this original discussion of the format of what you're doing, agree upon a particular time frame and et cetera, but it is not in general going to be the mentor who makes sure that you meet at those times and places. That's generally the mentee. The mentee sets the calendar and says, we're meeting at this time. In general, that's the way it's going to run. Now, if you've agreed to it up front and you have it on your plan for every semester, cool. That takes it off of everybody's plate. You all know what the rules are. And we're coming towards the end here of what I have to say. And so I want to point out that mentoring doesn't stop at the junior faculty level. It is lifelong. This is another thing that's changed, another thing that makes mentorship so important in our own careers. And that is that we have to be lifelong learners. We don't stop learning because we got promoted to professor. If we do, we're not doing our jobs. We don't stop learning, and we would be bored if we did. And we would be bored if we had if our career ended the day we got promoted to full professor. Why stay in that career? So no matter where you are, there's career growth. And at every transition, there's the question of what does that career growth mean for me? So some people say, I don't, so I moved from associate professor to full. I don't want to leave the bench. I don't want to do any administration. I want to sit at my bench and do science. And I'm a full professor now, so I can do that. That's a goal. Or, okay, I have students who are doing a great job. I've been promoted to full professor. What do I want to do with my life? Where do I want to go? Do I want to stay here? Do I want to go someplace else? Do I want to change careers? Do I want to learn something new? Do I want to go into administration? Do I want to move towards teaching? What do I want to do? So every step, every transition, you need mentors, more than one. And then I'd like to point out that our roadmap here is completely re-entrant. Every time we move, we come back to this self-reflection. What do I want? What are my goals? How do I achieve them? What do I need? Who can help me? Let's establish a relationship. Let's make it work for us. Let's continue it. Oh, let's go back. I think this changed. All the time, back and forth, constantly re-entrant, constantly changing. So throughout our careers, and I think this gets lost. The focus is so heavily on early career, postgraduate school or medical school, postdoc or residency, early career, and people get promoted to associate professor, and it's sort of as though the institution thinks they disappeared off the face of the earth. No, they didn't. They're in their most productive years. They need mentoring. Same for the full professors. Great, they've done a great job. They have an international reputation. That's really swell, but we want it to keep going. We want them to develop the next generation of scientist or clinician. We got to mentor them. So it just does not end. Okay, I've got 2 papers to talk to you about because I'd like to talk a little bit about where the research is going now in mentorship. So this first paper is focused on postdoctoral careers. And it was a very interesting paper because what it basically said is that we don't actually, all this interest that NIH has held in postdocs, et cetera, we don't do a very good job of tracking postdoctoral career trajectories. So there's not very much reliable data out there on what happens to them. So this manuscript is it's a survey, but it reports the results of a survey of 351 US academic institutions who train postdoctoral students. And there were 7,603 respondents from all states in the US. They discussed the fact that there is some, of course, some bias in their work, but this is a pretty good sample. I thought one of the things that was particularly interesting here is that only 49% of these respondents were US citizens. The majority were in their 30s. Most of them were in their first 3 years of postdoctoral training, which is not surprising because although we have postdoctoral training periods now in excess of 10 years, they were going to get responses from people who were still very hopeful of getting faculty positions. 53% were female and 71% of their mentors were male. And there are now right at the moment, there's a huge focus on this mismatch between not just gender, but racial and ethnic makeup, between lived experience, et cetera, where mentors and mentees are mismatched. And we don't really know whether that's a super negative impact or not, but it's something people are very interested in. And in terms of the impact of mentoring on their career choices, you can see that this is whether or not you're satisfied with your mentoring relationship. Here were those that were very satisfied. Here were those that were generally satisfied. And here were those that were not very. So you can see the majority were pretty satisfied. And here were their career choices. The majority wanted a career in academic research. Then we had a fair percentage in teaching, some in industry, and a small number in government work. So 57.7%, as I said, the majority chose a research-focused academic career. And one of the primary factors in the choice of that career is the perceived support from the mentor. Interestingly, other choices included the number of publications they had gotten out the door as postdocs, the number of conferences they had attended, the hours of work that they worked per week, and the feelings of career preparedness. All of those influenced their choice of career. But I thought it was fascinating that the number of publications and conferences ranked very high among this group of trainees. So I don't want to leave our medical colleagues out. And in truth, a lot of the academic mentorship literature is in academic medicine. And as they point out, academic physicians have multifaceted responsibilities that can be in conflict as they attempt to balance them with the pressure they are under to generate revenue. So this study was looking at the effect of a formal mentoring program. And in fact, it was a formal mentoring program that the lead authors had developed. And they had 4 institutions that instantiated this program and then evaluated it after 1 year. It was a matching program. They had a set of mentors, and then they had mentees come into the program and match themselves based on the skill sets of the mentors to their mentors. It was a self-reported outcome. Outcome measures were self-reported. They had 12 items asking about the partnership, the dyad. They had satisfaction, basically. Scholarship outcomes, there were 6 items, but this was only for the mentees, so it was publications, grants, and then work-related variables for job satisfaction. They got a 52% response rate on their 1-year survey. And they found that the mentors in this situation were significantly more senior than the mentees. The dyads agreed that the partnerships were satisfactory and that mentee progress was highly correlated to the satisfaction with that partnership. But interestingly, even though they agreed to this, the reasons that they agreed were slightly different. So for the mentors, their response was heavily determined by the mentee initiative and follow-through. For the mentees, their response was determined by the mentor's support, expertise, and their own personal research progress under that mentor's guidance. For both, for personal growth of the mentee was a predictor of satisfaction. So the mentee wanted to feel that not only was their professional career being developed, but also they personally were gaining some development. And for both mentor and mentee, the partnership itself, if it was successful, was very positive, had a very positive impact on their work-related satisfaction. And this has been reported in several papers that I've read, that you're more satisfied in your job and more likely to stay. So faculty retention is something that people study, more likely to stay in that job if your mentoring relationships are positive and you feel career growth is your career is being built. So all this is great, right? What could possibly go wrong? So I actually decided I would go out there and see if I could find a paper on this, because I can think of I know personally about 9 million ways this can go wrong, but I decided that writing that down would probably be really not useful. So I went to a paper, and this was a qualitative survey. And the survey was actually designed to determine the characteristics of successful versus failed mentoring relationships. So what causes failures in mentor-mentee relationships? They literally found 4 themes. 1, poor communication and the inability of the mentor to listen. And contributing to this was a lack of clear expectations, an inability on the part of the mentee to accept advice or feedback, and to the mentor, a failure to listen to the mentee's concerns. A pretty straightforward one is a lack of commitment or time on the part of the mentor. When I was working at the University of Pittsburgh, when we were doing a mentor-mentee relationship discussion, we did a role play. And in that role play, my colleague and I would either be the student or the faculty member. And one of the things we looked at is, I'm a faculty member, I'm sitting at my desk, I've got my computer on. Every time an email comes in, I have to go over to look at it. You as a mentee sitting across the table from me are not going to be very happy with that relationship if my time is 50% on you and 50% on my email. Or every time a call comes in, I take the call. So being distractible, inattentive, uninterested in what the mentee is trying to talk to you about, or on the mentee's part, uninterested in any advice being provided, is not going to lead to a good relationship. Another one was simple personality differences. We've talked a little about that. Maybe differences in learning styles, differences in the way in which you like to receive information, extroverts versus introverts. If you've got one on each side and they don't have any clue how to interact with one another, different communication styles. There are many, many ways in which personality can impact mentoring relationships, some for the best and some for the worst. Complete lack of empathy, that'll do it. And then the one that, in my experience, causes the most problems in the graduate, well, actually for junior mentees throughout, and that is a perceived or real competition between mentor and mentee, and a lack of clarity around intellectual property. And that generally, by that, I don't mean patents, I mean, although that could certainly take part here, I mean papers. So a lot of PIs never clarify authorship rules, and they blindside people. Well, partially they don't clarify them because they change them all the time. So no clear authorship rules, guaranteed failure problem. Inability to share a common research focus. And what do I mean by that? If you go into a PI's lab as a graduate student or a postdoc, of course you're going to be working on their research. That's why you chose them. The goal of the mentoring relationship is for you as the mentee to develop an independent research focus. Well, it's going to come out of the mentor's focus. If the mentor's not willing to share any data, if they won't let you take the work that you've done with you to your postdoc, if they won't allow you to use preliminary data you generated for your grants, well, that's going to be a problem, because they completely failed as a mentor. The relationship is exploitive, common problem. There's no credit for work done. And sometimes this is real and sometimes it's just perceived. One of my favorite perceived ills that frequently is just not true is somebody stole my idea. If you sit down in a big conference room and you talk about an idea, you shared it, it's now common property. Anybody can work with that. I've heard a million people say someone stole their idea. No, they didn't. They just got there before you did. So that's a common one, and it can cause all kinds of problems, even though it's more times than not real. But sometimes it's real, and when it's real, it's very bad. Okay, if the relationship is not going well, or if it went great, but it's gone as far as it can go, it needs to end. Social relationships do that. It can end and move from a mentorship to a collegial relationship or collaborative relationship. It can end and move to a friendship. It can end and just become less common, more episodic. But it behooves you to understand that it's time for this relationship to change. It could just be reinvented. It could completely end, whatever it requires. This is part of your reevaluation and paying attention. I think a lot of people get caught in bad mentoring relationships because they just plain didn't pay attention. All the warning signs were there that it was going to go off the rails, but they wait until it goes completely off the rails before they try to do anything. And sometimes that's too late. So be aware, keep working, keep evaluating, keep talking, be clear about what your goals are. Be sure that you're communicating. And when you end a relationship, if there was a formal relationship of any kind where you recognized each other as mentor and mentee, thank that mentor for the time that they spent. Even if you're walking away because you didn't think it was very fruitful, thank them for the time because they did put time in. And burning bridges is never a good idea. And most of the time it doesn't need to happen. Even if you're really ticked off, even if the relationship was terrible, making clear to the person that you're leaving that you hate their guts is just not going to help you. So it's just better to swallow that, be polite, walk away, and move on. And then, of course, if the relationship was successful, by all means, acknowledge it. And I'm just going to end with my two favorite slides, which is keep in mind that both you and your mentor have many, many roles and responsibilities. Take all of the lessons that you learned from being a mentee throughout your career and apply them to your role as a mentor. And then take everything you learned from being a mentor and apply it to being a mentee, because throughout your career, you should be both. If successful, these are partnerships. That success is shared. If my mentees are successful, that provides success for me. If I'm successful as a mentor, my mentees have been successful. So it's a shared success. And finally, that success, especially in a fast-paced world like we're living in now, is seldom achieved in isolation. Your career is not going to be lived in isolation. Your experiences will always be embedded in social contexts. So because of that, good mentors and good mentoring relationships will help to fuel your success and even more to improve and increase your career satisfaction. So now what I'd like to hear is from you. Maybe if you'd like to talk about things that have been great in a mentoring relationship, or things that haven't gone so well, or maybe you'd like to stare at a blank screen. But I would like to hear from some of you.
I have one more quick question, Linda. Just back to what you were saying about mentorship relationships that maybe don't go that well. Can you talk a little bit about how to extricate yourself from one of those and find a replacement mentor, what that negotiation needs to look like?
Well, of course, because these are also specific to specific situations, it's difficult to say, but I'll give you a couple of kinds of examples. So perhaps the most common way that I have seen relationships sour in graduate school and postdoctoral positions has been over authorship. And that situation can be quite nasty. So for example, I have seen situations where a graduate student has done a lot of work. They've written a paper. They have taken the draft of that paper to their advisor and they have put themselves on as first author. And the advisor says, oh, I'm going up for P&T this year. I really need to be first author on this paper. Now, there is absolutely nothing the mentee can do about that at this point in time, because this was not discussed prior to this discussion. And so now they know to protect themselves in the future. If they walk into a lab, they better find out what the authorship rules are up front, but they didn't know it now, and now they're blindsided. Okay, so that first one happens and they're going to let that pass because they really don't have much choice. But the next time they write a paper, they say to their advisor before they even start writing it, this was my work. Are we agreed upon that? And the advisor says yes. And they say, I should be first author on this because I'm going to write an F award and I need to have a first author publication. Are we agreed? And the advisor says yes. And when they write the paper, he takes first authorship again, or he gives it to another student. Okay, at that point, you know that you got a problem because he basically lied to you. And at that point, you would do two things. The first thing you would do is you would sit down and you would evaluate what your choices were. If you have the flexibility, if it's early enough in your career, if there's somebody else in your institution who does the similar work, and you could easily transfer your dissertation work to another laboratory, you can go talk to the PI in that laboratory and see if they would accept you. If they don't, or you can't find anybody, if those choices don't exist, then you have to ask yourself, are you willing to start over? Are you willing to change directions? And if you're not willing to do that, then you're going to suck it up and go through it. And I have seen those situations arise. And again, I've seen them arise in situations where people have essentially let bad behavior go far enough that now they're in like their 4th or 5th year, they have to finish. There's nothing they can do. You take it to the next step and you're careful. All right, I'm a faculty member and I'm a junior faculty in a very, very large department. I don't know my chair from Adam. I mean, I can say hello to the chair in the hallway. Well, let's face it, he's probably an old white guy. I'm going to say hello to him in the hallway. And other than that, I don't know him at all. And he doesn't know me. Who do I go to? So I go to somebody and it turns out that person doesn't really help much. Now I've got choices. I said, well, this person is, let's say what you're getting back from this person is, well, you're not really good enough here and you're not really good enough there and you might like to shift. And I say, well, I've read the rules and I think I am. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find another mentor. And what am I going to do about the one that I didn't like very well? I'm going to say, I really appreciate the time that you spent with me. Thank you for your advice. And then I just don't talk to me about that again anymore, because I get to make that choice. So I didn't actually have to say, I really didn't get much advice from you. I can end the relationship very nicely. Thank you very much for the advice that you provided. I appreciate your input. And I'm done. And I move on. Let's try another one. I'm working with a colleague. And we're both, this works all kinds of places. And we're part of a team. There are 3 of us. And we have a specific goal. We have been tasked with something very specific. We are supposed to, in 6 weeks, produce a piece of paper that talks about a program we're developing in blah. And one of the 3 of us never comes to meetings. And when they do, they railroad the entire meeting. So they aren't really participating. They aren't really discussing. They're just doing it all themselves. I've seen this one as well. I'm the chair of this committee. What am I going to do with this person? I got 2 choices and I have seen both. So I can, as the chair, say to this individual, I don't feel that you're pulling your weight in this committee. If you're unwilling to come to meetings on time and work collaboratively, then I'm going to ask you to leave the committee. This is guaranteed to make that person very angry, but you can do that. And you may get a better committee for it and you may get more stuff done. It may end up being the best answer. You want always to have given the person a choice. You need to start coming to committee meetings on time. You need to be more collaborative. These are things I expect of you. Give them a couple chances, kick them off. Or you can just say, I'm just going to let this ride. You got those two choices. And I know someone who went through a situation like this, and at the end of the day, the person that they asked to leave the committee was indeed very angry. And that person who was chairing that committee knows darn well that any chance that person that she kicked off gets, they'll undercut her any way they can. She made an enemy, and an enemy that's willing to make good on being an enemy. But she was willing to take that chance. She was willing to accept that responsibility when she made her choice. And so she did. She didn't have to do that, but she chose to. And she knew exactly what that would end up entailing, and she was willing to accept that. So does that answer it? I've tried 3 different ways of answering that question because I think it's very contextual.
Yeah, no, I think that's extremely helpful. And I will let you move on to answer some other questions.
Hopefully I'll get some, or even some discussion.
I have a comment. I'm listening to this and I'm thinking in my head, and I'm in the College of Nursing. And this seems very geared towards either our science department or the medical school, maybe pharmacology. I'm in the undergraduate program, but some of the things that you were talking about seem like serious ethical issues, and that the mentee in these situations are put in a position where they're a very vulnerable population, that they've worked their butt off, and somebody who's throwing out a little advice gets to run away with their writing and their work. Aren't there ethical rules and guidelines that you follow? Because that just made me mad just listening to it, and it's not even real.
The answer is the majority of people would not engage in such behavior. But is it illegal? No. Did it cause irreparable harm to anybody? No. So what recourse does anyone have? And again, there is recourse. You can walk away. You can complain to your department chair, and it may even get you someplace. So if this is a pattern of behavior that this person has exhibited, and 15 graduate students have gone, you can make sure that they're flamed on the net. You can go to conferences and warn anybody who's going to work with this person that they're going to run into this problem, and people do that. So there are choices. But can it happen, and is it reprehensible? Yeah.
I have 2 questions, twofold. First off, really great presentation. And I love any sort of insight on mentorship, as I am junior faculty, and it is kind of navigating uncharted territory sometimes. Twofold. So I have been graced with numerous wonderful mentors, which is a pro and a con to me. I feel like sometimes there's too many cooks in the kitchen. And so sometimes I find that it's hard to navigate and know whose advice should jockey to the front, where we're sort of in this position as junior faculty where you're not really confident, or maybe in the position to make that decision unilaterally. And yet you've got, let's say, 7 mentors kind of guiding you. So any advice on that one? I've got one more for you.
A great question. Too many mentors. So I think that the answer to that question is kind of twofold. The first one is in terms of navigation. Well, there's an easy answer. If it's a specific issue, and in general, if you're looking at conflicting information from mentors, then it's a fairly specific issue. So let's just take, I'm writing a grant. This is where it is. Here's the preliminary data I have. And one guy says, I think you should write an R01. And another guy says, I think you should write an R21. And another guy says, I don't think you should write anything because you're not ready. Okay. So I got 3 different pieces of advice with the same data sitting in front of me from people who are supposed to be expert in this, who sit on study panels. What do I do? Well, you got a few choices. You have 7 mentors. That was only 3. You go for the majority rule. That one will work sometimes. You go for another outside opinion, Or you look at the data and you say, what do I think? And you make your own decision. And those are your choices.
Yeah. And then my second one is with regard to a mentor that is specific to your career path. Would you suggest choosing someone within your department institution or someone outside of your department institution to help guide you in that process?
To be honest, if you have someone who's inside, who you don't feel, you have someone who's inside, who you think you could work with without creating any kind of a conflict situation, I think you are better working within your own institution because they know the rules.
Right.
And you want somebody who knows the rules and is willing to share. So realistically, for career development within a given institution, you're better off working with people who've developed their careers to some degree within that institution. But there are situations in which that could be counterproductive. So there are situations in which that feels conflicted. Maybe to the mentor, they feel there's a conflict because they're helping you and not necessarily somebody else, or maybe the conflict is that you work too closely together. So they're almost perceived to be almost, and you guys are going to be shocked to hear me say this, almost too preferential towards you. That is to say, they're so invested that they can't stand back a little bit. And so you kind of have to evaluate where you feel the person you've identified fits in that continuum. And if they can be objective enough to step back and really give you that difficult feedback, then you're probably better off with someone internal. But if you never hear anything from them other than how wonderful you are, they're probably not being all that helpful. Because however wonderful we are, we do have faults. I know.
I like that red lighting whenever I get my papers back. That means they actually paid attention.
Linda, in the College of Pharmacy, we are working on developing a more formal mentoring program for faculty. And I think our first focus will be on junior faculty, but we hope to grow that into mid-career faculty at some point as well. But we're a small college. We have about 60 faculty members, and our mentoring program will probably be less based on similar work, collaborative work, and more on all aspects of the faculty life success.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess my question for you is, what are some suggestions that you might have in preparing our faculty to be better mentors? Are there certain programs you've seen, other than, of course, them listening to your talk? But, what would you suggest to help us get people maybe at the same level, or, develop those as mentors?
So with a small faculty, you might actually consider a one-to-many program. I know that's been used in nursing, as I said before, and with some success there. And by the way, Kimberly, I don't think this is as medical focused as you think. I think most of what we've talked about will work for anybody. It just has to be, it will work for a teaching program as easily as a research program. The ideas, the concepts are really still the same. I think with a small faculty, Amy, you might really consider the one-to-many model. And now, as I said, how many is many? But if you have a mismatch between the number of faculty and the number, or the number of senior faculty and the number of junior faculty, you might want to consider something like that. In terms of training mentors, I am not convinced that mentors and mentees need some kind of separate training. What I feel like mentors need to hear, what they need to understand, is that the mentoring relationship, really and truly, that the mentoring relationship is a social relationship. We're social animals. We understand social. When we back away, when we start thinking of mentorship as being extra social, super formal, then it loses something. Because if I can't interact with a mentee as a human being, as a social person, then I'm missing something. They're missing something from me, right? Just because I can codify, I might as well write it down on a piece of paper. We're not a mentor anymore. I'm providing advice. And by the way, I've found that advice via email is nowhere near as effective as advice provided in person. So I think a lot of what mentors need to understand is that that's the relationships they're entering into when they mentor people. Because I think they get lost in the I think people have a tendency to get lost in the detail. I'm supposed to be providing tons of information. No, you're supposed to be providing the information this person wants to have or needs to have. And so that would be the training I would give. What are the resources available at this institution? And how can you fit them to the trainees that you have? They don't all need to do exactly the same thing. Mentors need to understand that. Mentors need to understand that it's their job to listen to that mentee, tell them what they need, and then try to help them get it. Not to say to them, oh, I see you're deficient here. You can help guide them towards that, but that's really not your job. Your job is to listen to where they think they have to grow. And then maybe to say, that's great, and I can help you do that. Maybe you would like to consider this as well. So those are a couple of places where I think mentors need to hear what it is they're trying to do. It's important to realize that it's for the person you're working with, not for you, and not to do a core dump of all the things you've learned in your life. However useful that might ultimately be in the course of the discussion, that's not your job starting out. Your first job is to listen to what they have to say. Your second job is to help them develop that plan. And so another thing to think about is literally having all of your mentors come together for an hour and talk about IDPs. What are they? What would we like it to look like? Can we agree on what we think students should would best put in here? Because here for you and Kimberly and for those of us in the medical school or in the basic sciences, there are some differences. So if you're in an institute or college where the primary focus is going to be on teaching, or for your junior faculty is going to be on teaching, or the primary emphasis is going to be on research, then their goals are going to have to go in slightly different directions. Either way, as junior faculty, they have to have excellence in 2 categories. So you've got to provide some guidance that allows them to do that, whatever those 2 categories are that are best for them.
Linda, this was absolutely fantastic. There's so much information here, and I'm glad we're recording it, and the people that weren't able to see it are going to be able to go back to it. The other thing people may not know is we kind of sprung this on Linda not too long ago, and she really did a great job.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. It was great to see so many faces I know.